Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we are continuing our conversation with the Start Here series by talking about pornography. The Start Here series is intended to be little snapshots, little nutshell conversations, if I were to mix my metaphors, that will help you address a specific gospel tech conversation that might apply to your family in this season. You can share them with your friends. If you work in a church or a school, this is where you could return for those refreshers and reminders without having to go through all 200 plus episodes or whatever the entire years of this year's content. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about pornography, how we can address it and talk about it, what we need to know, and then third, how we can actually apply that information practically. And the hope is this is encouraging to you. It's something you can be used to be equipped to have these hard conversations with your kiddos, and that you can share with others who are doing the same. So with no further ado, let's dive in. Well, how do we talk about pornography? We need to know what we're talking about. We have to be informed. So first things first, we need to know about pornography is that it is what researchers would call a supernormal stimuli. Most of the references, by the way, I've gotten are from the Fight the New Drug website. And the reason for that is twofold. One, there's hundreds of thousands of research studies done on pornography going back, to the 60s and 70s. So there can be a lot. I use Fight the New Drug as kind of the filtering mechanism. And then in their articles, you can find their research and go look at that research yourself. So when I reference a study, just assume that I actually found it originally through Fight the New Drug. Even though I've read the study myself now, I still want to shout out Fight the New Drug for doing all the work to compile really excellent research that you can then go and read the research for yourself and do it in sequence and see how it starts to paint the picture of what pornography is doing to society, families, and our brains. With that in mind, supernormal stimuli is reference out of Barrett and Deirdre in 2010. And the reference is an older reference, but the idea is this. You can be trained to get used to something that is unnatural. And not only are you used to it now, but it's preferential. So the example that's referenced is cardboard butterflies. There were some researchers, they took some male and female butterflies, put them in an environment, and then the researchers painted cardboard butterflies. They painted them as females, and they accentuated the parts of the female butterflies that the males find most interesting, put them in with the male and the female butterflies, and the males flocked to said cardboard butterflies. Problem being guaranteeing their extinction at this point. That community is now officially dead because they're not going to mate. They're specifically stuck on these cardboard butterflies. That you can see the corollary where we are, but let's make it very clear. So this is from Voon et al., 2014. Supernormal stimuli, and specifically in this case pornography, can take our brain's natural stimuli, our desire for intimacy and connection, and give us more quantity, more exaggerated and more supernormal versions of that thing until it can override what we think is normal, warp what we perceive as exciting, and make real intimacy seem less interesting by comparison. That's what we're talking about. Pornography is a supernormal stimuli, and if we were to put this in other words, we would say the porn trains the brain for unnatural stimuli, that it needs something that doesn't exist in nature, and that becomes the preference. You can actually train your brain to need it, and there's a couple factors in there. We won't go huge into it, but basically the idea is your brain is already wired for being attracted to somebody else. And in nature, we see animals attracted to novelty anyway. The problem with pornography is it's so much faster than real life. For monkeys, they would need a second female to enter the room. All you need is a second browser. And that is really important because it ends up training a behavior that doesn't exist in real life. You can't match the frequency. You can't match the intensity. You can't match the diversity. It is a super normal stimuli. It's a cardboard butterfly. Not only that, the individuals you're watching have been filtered and augmented and surgically adapted to not reflect what an actual human looks like. This is actually stated, I love it, by Billie Eilish in a Howard Stern interview. If you'll give me license to reference this, but Billie Eilish, is a famous singer, and she's going on about how she hates pornography, both because of how it depicts women and how it's impacted her life, some relational abuse that she suffered because she thought that this was normal, which is not, by the way, uncommon for young people to witness pornography and just assume, well, this is sex. This is what happens in relationships. And that's also part of our danger when it comes to supernormal stimuli. But she makes that point of like, these people aren't regular people. We don't come looking like this. This is augmented either digitally or physically. And that is important for us to recognize when we are forming an appetite through repetition. We know this because of the Hebbian theory of learning, this idea that neurons that fire together wire together, and neural plasticity, that when we receive and we reward a stimuli multiple times, and there's nothing more rewarding for the human brain than sex outside of drugs. But for a natural behavior, like your body is wrapped around this behavior and rewards you heavily for participating. So now you're ingesting, now you're rewarding, and now you're forming a behavior. So I spend all this time to tell you, by the way, the supernatural stimuli, I can include this in the notes, but Kuhn and Gallinet, 2014, Bonka, Morris, Mitchell et al., 2016, Albury, Lowry, Friend, 2017. These are all research studies that support porn trains the brain for unnatural stimuli. That's important because that building demands novelty. It's not more pornography, as Fight the New Drug says. It's new pornography. And this would be Kukanas and Over 2000 and Mewison and Over 1990. This idea that it's not more, it's not a quantity thing. It's like, oh, I need a longer version of the same content I've been consuming. Like, no, you need new. And one of the studies done, actually both of these studies done, males and females, the researchers showed an image or showed actually, in this case, a scene from pornography. And then they showed it repeatedly and they watched the engagement levels lower in the viewers. And then they, without warning, switched to a new scene. So still same content, but now it's a new input, and engagement went right back up to where it was at the beginning, meaning you expire an interest in the one because this is built around selfish consumption and novelty. And now we have to pivot to another. And that's now all of a sudden I'm re-engaged. That's important because now you're training your brain to need the new. Like, yes, it works, but it only works that once. That's not new anymore. Now you got to find something else. And this is what we are finding as Dr. Norman Doidge, The Brain That Changes Itself, fantastic book about neuroplasticity, but he has a section on pornography and he says this: pornography satisfies every one of the prerequisites for neuroplastic change, meaning it satisfies, if you wanted to adapt a brain through behavioral reward systems to getting a new behavior to form and become permanent and adapt to needing that behavior, pornography's got it. He continues, when pornographers boast that they are pushing the envelope, making new content, what they don't say is that they must, because their customers are building up tolerance to that content. And this, again, is from Brain That Changes Itself, a book he wrote in 2006 or 7. Sorry, I'll say 6 confidently, but Norman Doidge is the doctor who wrote the book. And what we are studying for this first piece, what do we need to know about pornography, is it is a supernormal stimuli that changes the way the brain works until you demand the novelty and the uniqueness of something that is unnatural. It doesn't exist in the world that we live in. It only exists through the screen. That is important because the research we have on pornography shows it causes anxiety, depression, and a reduced sense of well-being. That's Wardeka, Wilk et al. 2018, Harper, Hodgins 2016, and Koletic 2017. It increases the likelihood of dangerous sexual behaviors, Wright and Tokunaga et al. 2016, Zhao and Liu in 2021, and it increases interpersonal and relational problems. Rhodes, Markman 2011, Wright, Tokunaga again 2017, and Perry 2018. That's a lot of research. That was a tip of the iceberg. Fight the New Drug, again, compiles a lot of this. If you want to be like, hey, I'm not sure that matches with reality, please enter their research into the internets and go find abstracts, go to PubMed, get yourself a short-term subscription to some of these medical journals and read them. It is powerful, interesting stuff. And I would say there are absolutely researchers out there who are like, no, this is getting it all wrong. Here's why it's wrong. Read those too. You're going to generally find what they're arguing is porn isn't the worst thing you could do, which, okay, Like, all right, like if we're looking for worst case scenarios, but I don't believe many of us are, we're looking for best case. Having to be the most consistent, loving, caring, satisfying, relationally, sexually, and healthful interpersonally, including raising kids. We're going to find much more research on the side of pornography does not help that. In fact, porn causes anxiety, depression, reduced sense of well-being, dangerous sexual behaviors. Again, especially young people who view it begin to think, well, this is sex, this is normal. And then interpersonal and relational problems. That one, a lot of that research relates to dating, marriage, and fidelity, basically. Going back to like the early 2000s, some of that research. So that's the first stuff we need to know, is that pornography is not simply religious people or church people or Christians saying, oh, like that's bad and we should shame it. In fact, that's not what I'm trying to do here. And if you feel shame from what I just shared, please hear me. I'm not blaming you for anything that has happened to you or that you have participated in on purpose or otherwise. I am saying that pornography as a creation is not good. Now, yes, God's design for us is one man, one woman, and only sexually related in marriage because it's a metaphor. Like marriage will go away at some point because, well, it's supposed to show two becoming one and what that looks like. It's supposed to show constant serving and loving for one another, just like Jesus Christ loves God the Father so much that he comes down and he says, I only do what my Father does, right? And when he goes to die, he says, now the time has come, Father, glorify your name. And God the Father speaks from heaven and says, I've glorified it and I'll glorify it again. The idea that Jesus was doing this because he loves the Father. And then he says, when I am raised again, the Father will put all things under my feet. That the Father loves the Son and he's going to give it to him. Well, marriage is this little itty bitty picture of like, how can I submit and love and serve this other? Like, how can I try to outdo the other one constantly in loving and service and kindness and hope and joy? That when we die and rise again, well, we're not married to that person anymore. Jesus makes this very clear. There's no marriage in heaven. There's no babies. Instead, we're going to be like the angels. We don't exactly know all that entails, but that this is a metaphor that we become then the bride of Christ. Don't get it weird and twisted. Just hear it for what it is. That marriage is a metaphor for what the church, capital C, all Christians, become for eternity in this loving relationship with Jesus Christ, their Savior. And that sex is then a part of that explanation. It's a way to serve and to love and to be intimate and to becoming one. That is part of a greater mystery that we don't really get. We don't understand the Trinity. Like, we understand it as an idea, but we can't like explain how are three persons one? Like, we're told that marital sex is part of that, and that to do it outside of that is also a sin against our bodies, right? Paul makes this clear. So I go on that whole piece to say sex is good. Pornography is not, because it's a distortion of something good. That's why we're calling it out. Science agrees with that. Pornography is not beneficial. It's societal issues and personal issues and mental health issues that come from it are not beneficial. So that's first. Then we need to go to, all right, but how are kids getting to it? Smartphones. Sam Black is the VP of Research and Recovery at Covenant Eyes. And he said smartphones is the number one way they're seeing teens engage pornography. We need to know that when we talk about porn. Fight the New Drug notes that porn gets more monthly searches than Twitter, Instagram, Netflix, Pinterest, and LinkedIn combined. So we need to know this is frequent. It's happening. The volume is massive for the amount of traffic pornography is drawing. And if you want to go back to episode 191 and 182, those are two Sam Black conversations. Go check those out. They're good. Sam is on point. The second one is more talking specifically kids. The first one is 182 is more about like, how do we talk about pornography in big picture? 191 is more, how do I address this with my children? But now we know that pornography on its face is not good. Yes, biblically, it's not good. But as a society, we have a problem. And it's not helping the way we view one another, and it's not helping relationships, and it's not helping children. So what do? Well, first, we need a definition. I like this from Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Pornography means pictures, videos, or even cartoons of people with little or no clothes on that focus on the private parts of the body we keep covered with a swimsuit. This is simple language. Good Picture, Bad Picture is a book you can get on Amazon. There's one, so the Good Picture, Bad Picture is kind of the 6 to 10. Good Picture, Bad Picture Junior would be appropriate down to 4 and 5-year-olds. We've read it with all of our kids. We have 4, 8, and 10. We read it repeatedly. It doesn't use the word pornography all the time. It talks big picture. If there's images that make you feel uncomfortable, if there's things that show parts of our bodies that we keep covered, if there's, people being unkind, like you tell me, gives us words. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And that's valuable tools. So start to introduce our children to this. They unfortunately do need to know that this is real, that it exists, and that there are times where pictures can be unkind, and you want to ask about that. So we have to have a definition for porn, but keep in mind, it's not just the good picture, bad picture definition. We have a biblical definition for pornography, and it actually is a bigger scope than just whether people have clothes on or not. Jesus says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And it's very important. This is Matthew 5:28 through 30. It's very important that we recognize Jesus didn't say, and everyone who sees someone naked. He doesn't say anything about culturally appropriate clothing. Keep in mind, modesty is also in the Bible, so we want to keep that as an important part of the conversation. But that's not this point. Jesus says it's an act of your heart. If you look at an image, if you look at an individual and say, I'm going to take that person's likeness and use it for my gratification, I'm going to lust. That's the intent to feel sexual desire unilaterally. There's no intimacy, there's no relationship, there's no covenant. This is not a metaphor for how God treats us. This is just, I want to feel good now on my terms, and I will. Then that's sin, Jesus says. He actually goes so far as to say, if your right eye causes you to sin, cut it out. That sin's going to bring death. And if you just leave it there and keep it secret, if you keep your little pet sin and go, well, it's not that bad, it's not really hurt anyone, I haven't seen, my wife hasn't said anything, like whatever the argument might be, Jesus is saying that is sickness. It is going to bring death to all of you. Cut it out and cut it off and gouge it out. So that's what comes after he says this. But in this piece, keep in mind who he's talking to. He's talking to a culture that is closer to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan than it is to modern-day America. Like women wore full body coverings at this point. Their hair was to remain covered. That was a sign of respect. It wasn't inappropriate to see a woman's hair, but it was considered intimate. It wasn't something they did in public. They kept their hair covered, and there's parts of wedding ceremonies where women would uncover their hair for their husbands, and it was seen as a sign of their beauty and their strength, and it was nice. It was good, but we're not seeing like any amount of skin where we could be like, well, like, that was just inappropriate clothing. That wasn't a thing in the Middle East in this time. There was no such thing as inappropriate clothing by our standards. And even anyway, that's tangents. The people we would consider like, oh, they'd be wearing inappropriate things still involved ropes. So, looking with lustful intent points out that it comes from us. Pornography has to do with our hearts, which means that picture may not have naked people. And maybe it's a halftime show. Maybe it's a catalog. Maybe it's a website. Maybe it's whatever. But if you're using it for selfish gratification outside of a committed covenant marital relationship, then that's lust and that's sin. And whatever's bringing that sin just became expendable. It needs to go away. So maybe it's get rid of your smartphone. Maybe it's get rid of a personal computer. Maybe it's get rid of access to whatever that device is that's not accountable and within the hedge of your family's tech. Make sure that that's part of the conversation. We are addressing the heart behind this, what's going on inside us. That's also important. Ann and I went back to our kids like, hey, our two older, hey, we've talked, you're a couple months into school now. We talked about pornography. Has anyone shown you, or have you seen, has anyone talked about those pictures of people being unkind with their bodies? And Owen said, no. Henry goes, yeah. I'm like, oh, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, I saw it in a magazine. I'm like, okay, where'd you see the magazine? Like, by the way, if this happens, parents, like, do your best to be cool. Like, be just like, interesting, like don't do the like you've just entered interrogation mode and they'll sense like the danger rising, like all I can sense is the intensity and I don't want to talk about this anymore. We asked for a follow-up. He's like, oh, like this magazine's in our house. I'm like, cool, could you show that to us? He ran out of the room, brought back a 1984, I think, National Geographic. And we're like, okay, well, what is it? And he flipped right to this page. And sure enough, there's some people dancing around without clothes on. And we're like, all right, we get it. These people are not lusting. This is not the point. Like that's literally how they dress and that's their life. And it's unfortunate. This is probably your first experience, like witnessing this situation as these people not wearing clothes, but great. Like, thank you for telling us. That's so good. Also, Anna and I, as we walked out of the room, noted, like, keep in mind, like, knew where the picture was and knew where the magazine was, right? Like, it hadn't left memory of, like, this was a notable moment, but was willing to tell us, and that's awesome. And, like, that's part of the conversation. Yes, I disposed of said magazine and we can now move forward, but we now have that relational piece of like, yep, that's roughly what we're talking about. These people, like, this isn't lust. Let's put some boundaries around it. Like, seeing a naked person doesn't mean I've sinned. But we can watch our hearts, and the fact that that's stuck so firmly in your brain tells me, all right, there's something going on there, and I want to continue this conversation and come back. And parents, that's what we can do. Do it as the 1,000 Hours Outside team says. You do it in 1,000 little drops, right? Little drop conversations of like, we're just going to keep talking about this. Speaking of talking about it, at birds_bees, mom grandma combo, I guess is what you call it, but a mom daughter combo. They would say, be medical, be matter of fact, and move on. So you're going to say the body parts. I'm going to say them right now just so that you had to hear them out loud. And I say that just so you could pause it if you need young ears and you don't want them to hear it from me. But you have to say penis and you have to say vagina. Like, you have to say those words. People cringe when I say that from the pulpit sometimes. I'm up front on the stage speaking at a church. But like that needs to happen. The reason that's important is twofold. One, for their own sense of clarity and communication, that they can state the body parts. That's really good. There's no shame with it. It's like the Adam and Eve thing. They don't know that people feel shame about these body parts. It's just what there is. And that's great. That's like the proper form of sex education. By the way, by saying penis and vagina, you're not going to like send your child on a bender. Like, you're answering their questions. That's the reason you're here. So they don't have to go Google it because the questions have been answered. The second part of that is Sam Black from Covenant Eyes argued the same. He says, you're not going to like ruin your child by mentioning these words near them. These words are not bad. They're facts. This is what boys and girls have for genitalia. And that's important. Like, biologically, that's important. Like, we're humans. This is how we reproduce. And these are the body parts that let us do that. So that's important. And then on the second piece, and this is heavier, but I do want to make sure it's been said. Our church did a training with a great group called GRACE. It's the Gospel Response to Abuse in the Church Environment, is what the acronym stands for. And GRACE training, they basically say, if it comes to prosecution and someone needs to be brought before the court of law because of abuse in a church environment, the one who was abused, in this case a child, has to be able to say the words. And if they can't, if all they know is euphemistic little language, it can get caught up in lawyer speak and never actually bring charges to bear on that individual. So that's horrific. But what we're doing is protecting our children so they can tell us quickly if something goes awry, and protecting our children so that bad people can get, let's not even go bad people, so that abusers can get the consequences that are going to be most helpful. Those abusers need professional care, support, and supervision. And that's knowing the words is going to help. So be medical. Talk it out. Greta Eskridge at Ma and Pa Modern says it this way: just like we don't show strangers our private parts, we don't want to see other people's private parts. So if you ever see pictures or movies on a computer or a phone, or if someone shows them to us, we look away, we go and tell a safe grown-up what we saw, know that you won't be in trouble. And I love this last part of it. Moms and dads, as we listen to this, grandmas and grandpas, our children coming to us saying, I saw pornography, is not awesome, especially since some of them are going to come and say, I saw it on purpose repeatedly. That's not great. We don't want to hear that. That's not the desire of our heart. But also know the fact that they're bringing this to us is huge. This means that a child who was running the path towards death, as Jesus says, like, you need to cut this off and gouge it out, has turned and come home. That prodigal child who was dealing with the shame and the guilt and the struggle all on their own is now bringing to you this thing that is really heavy. And as Chris McKenna with Protect Young Eyes says, celebrate like they got straight A's. Like, go nuts, because your child who was lost is now found. Your child who was running in disobedience has returned. And that is absolutely something we want to address deliberately and intentionally and lovingly. So take them out to dinner, take them out to dessert, celebrate, praise them, hug them, and then make the hard choices, right? Some things are going to get cut off and gouged out. Some new hedges are going to go up. Some special forms of accountability and some independence is going to be lost because, well, your child has shown that they're not yet trustworthy in some area of tech use or some area of independence. And so you're going to support them in that for this season. whatever that looks like for your family. If it's an adult child who's come to you and asked for help, that might look different than if it's a teenage child still living in your home. But just know, we now know how to talk about pornography, or we know the information about pornography, what it is, that it exists, that it's really bad, and how to define it biblically, culturally. We talked about good picture, bad picture. And then some of the words we can use about this, like it is bad. You can tell me, I'm not going to get you in trouble. It doesn't mean there's no consequences. It means I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm going to take direct action in anger against this thing that's harming you. And that's a loving thing to do. So you can be angry at it. We should, in fact. We probably should be more angry than we are, because we're like, it's everywhere. Like that's not loving. I have to pray against that indifference myself, because I hear it so much. And at some point we're like, man, I'm just tired. Like the Lord encourages us to not tire in doing what is good, which brings us to part 3. We're going to make a plan. With your family, you need to teach them to run, to tell, and to remember. This is the good picture, bad picture model that they'll teach you in the book. Please read that book. It's incredible. But the idea is you're going to say no and go. So no, if you see an image pop up on a phone, if someone shows it to you on the bus, if you see it in the hallway, if it pops up when you search something on the computer, you physically turn yourself away. Run like Joseph and get out of Dodge. Okay. Get out of that physical space. Even if you're curious, even if you're interested, even if you're excited, no and go. And then you're going to tell a caring adult. They need to know who it is. Mom or dad, grandma or grandpa, aunt or uncle. When they have to tell you the location, in my room, in your office, on my phone, on the bus, in the locker room, in the classroom, in the cafeteria. By the way, these are all spaces that I know of families who have children have bumped into pornography. I was in this location. I saw, and then insert the blank. I saw something that made me uncomfortable. I saw pornography. I saw whatever the phrase is that you guys have agreed on. And then that reminder of the reason you're coming to me, child, to tell me this. The reason I want you to come is this mistake, this bad stuff, and bad like on a literal level. Like it's not good for relationships and brains and our hearts. This stuff doesn't define you. It describes you now. This is going to be part of your journey, and your new journey starts here. But you're defined by your identity in Christ. Looking at that and finding satisfaction in that is a lie now. You're no longer a child of wrath deserving punishment, as Ephesians 2:3 tells us. You're not that. You're a child of God, and seeking satisfaction in that will never bring it. And it's a lie about who actually defines you. So come to me and be reminded that you are beautiful and that you are loved and that you are new, and that this thing, sure, we need to address it, but it doesn't shake my love for you, and it doesn't shake God's love for you, and it doesn't shake your identity and purpose. So that's some of what we want to cover on this. 3 things again. Know the research and the information. Go to Fight New Drug or check out the show notes, and there's some research in there. Then know how to define pornography. Yes, the bigger picture of people being unkind, no clothes over swimsuit areas, but also the heart issue. That this is about loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, which means we're not going to lust. We're not going to take people made in the image of God and use them for our selfish gratification. And we're going to make a plan for that. Yes, build hedges around your technology, your devices, your network, your family, and make sure that you're talking out the game plan. When you see pornography, because I gave you a smartphone or whatever, bring it to me. I care about you and I love you. And doing so increases my trust in you, because otherwise when I find out, I'm going to go, hey, what's going on here? And we're going to have another hard conversation that might go a different direction. So please tell me first. There are other resources. Go back to the canopy. Go back to the hedge conversation about how do we build a hedge around our family specifically. You can go to the gospeltechworkshop.com. That's where you can learn how to build tech hedge around conversations about content and priorities and safety. Check that out. And then, if you have any questions on this, you can write me, Nathan@gospeltech.net, or if they're just unrelated to this, you can just go questions@gospeltech.net. That's how I accrue future questions for future topics. And then to review a couple other great resources, @birds_bees, talking about pornography, and @MonPalModern. Those are 2 great pairs who do wonderful work equipping parents in pornography for research. Fight the New Drug. And if you want a book, The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Deutsch is solid. Very good read. If you have any others, reach out to us. We're also on social media @LoveGodUseTech. And would you share this resource with others and join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.